Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, as well as the Basement Radio Arcade podcast on YouTube. Back with another episode of Talking About Games. It's just me monologuing about games and news and stuff I've been playing, so welcome aboard. So without much further ado, let's get to it. First news story in the rundown tonight. By the way, thanks so much for everybody who happened to stop by and is hanging out in the chat. I know Otacon was in here earlier. Anybody else, thanks so much for swinging through. First story on the rundown is a little ditty over on PC Games and by Anthony Jones. Surgeon Simulator. Surgeon Simulator developer lays off 1/3 of staff. Bossa Studios, developer of Surgeon Simulator, has laid off 1/3 of its staff due to increasing operational costs and lack of funding. The story reads, and I quote, "Following a rough year of games industry cuts, UK developer Bossa Studios is unfortunately next to go through the ringer. Known for developing Surgeon Simulator, the studio has laid off 1/3 of its staff, which affects mostly its QA and production teams. GameIndustry.biz learned of the news from Bossa Studios co-founder Enrique Olivier. Notes on this from things that I scrounged up around the net today. So as mentioned, Bossa Studios is over in the UK. The number of staff that were affected was about 19 people. The studio is only about 60 people total, so there are about 40 left. So these staff were actually laid off at the end of 2023, so I think this is a matter of a thing that was already done, but was just being reported about today. Mostly QA. It's production staff, which, you know, for those of you who don't work in IT, are typically is a reference to like your operations personnel, people who are assigned to maintain the code or maybe push the code to push updates of the code to Steam, things of that nature. There are people more on the operational side than the development side. I'm not sure exactly how many type of kind of DevOps, service people now. Also service support people who were associated with, answering questions and things like that, that may have come either, from Valve if there was a problem with the game, or people reporting, or, people responding to support tickets that were being, entered from either marketplaces or directly to the developer. So about 40 devs remain on the staff. Also, the people were affected, like I said, QA and production staff, but also non-UK based staff. So as you would expect in our current world, post-pandemic world, where people are working largely remotely, if you are a remote worker and you are part of a smaller percentage of people who work remotely, while a bulk of the people either work in the office or at least in the same geographic area, really, I mean, I should say, obviously layoffs are unfortunate, right, whenever they happen. It's a tragic occurrence. It disrupts people's lives. So in no way anything that I'm saying, should be thought of as me applying levity to the situation. But I do want to point out, right, if you are a remote worker and you're kind of out on the periphery and out on the edge and not as close to the flagpole as we like to say in corporate America, often those are people who are targeted, right, for layoffs, versus somebody who works in the office or somebody who lives right in the same geographic area and is on at least the same time zone as the office, doing things like setting up meetings or, doing Scrum or working with people on agile development teams and things like that when people are outside of the time zone and need special accommodations for, normal times that you would like to set up meetings like that. That just creates a logistic impact. So those are sometimes the type of things that happen. The attributions that the company made for the reasons were things that I was a little, I don't want to say skeptical of, but I definitely had questions about. So the cause for the layoffs was, AAA games that came out in the holiday season. So Enrique Olivier made references to games that came out in September and beyond, increasing operational costs, and I think, well, let me come back to that, and delayed funding decisions that were coming from, I think, people that they were trying to make deals with to fund additional projects. So AAA games in the holiday season 2023 was a bonga year. Lots of AAA games came out. Super huge, busy holiday season. People didn't expect Baldur's Gate 3 to do as well as it did, so not necessarily a huge surprise there. That seems like a rather logical causality. Increasing operation costs, maybe driven by two things. Number one, if you have people who are on that operational side of the house, again, I question that a little bit because Bossa Studios doesn't really necessarily run any type of games as a service games that I've been able to see. They're working on one that may be games as a service, but it doesn't seem like they would have a really huge operational side cost. It's not like Fortnite or Call of Duty, where you have to literally employ an army of sysops people and things of that nature. So that one was the one that was kind of weird to me. But I will say, from if you do consider again people who need to do patches and provide support and answer tickets like that, that could be a thing, because I think in this current state of the market, it's a little onesie twosie. In some cases, you would think that indie games, that AA games, don't need to be as polished as AAA games, that there's a higher expectation. But I might also say, if you buy an indie game or you buy a AA game and it's not as polished as a AAA game, and there is a polished AAA game available, if there is a Baldur's Gate 3 on the market, it's more likely that you'll bypass that game or put that game down. Because why would you be bothered spending time with a game that wasn't as high in production costs and didn't have as many features and didn't have as much gameplay as some of these other games? So that may have been one thing behind it. If you were a heavy operational side, operation, then in today's current market, anytime you have to employ people with the DevOps label in their names, your costs are going to go way up here, right? So talking to recruiters, in the industry, if you're looking to hire a DevOps person, and you're talking, less than 200K, you're really, in certain geographic areas again, but in my geographic area, we're a high IT employment area. There's a lot of people, in a lot of high talent bands. You're not going to get anywhere, right? Offering, lowballing a salary, under 200K, it's going to be significantly challenging. So again, if they were that type of operation, I could see that. Delayed funding decisions, again, that one I do see some logic in. Falke has talked on BRAP about how, we're seeing potentials where, VC investors and corporate investors may be looking to spread, less money into indie games. We had the problem with Embracer, right, missing out on the $2 billion deal that theoretically was coming from Saudi Arabia. Now the Saudi Arabians looked to be spreading money around, so it wasn't a matter necessarily of them not putting money into games. It was just a matter of them not putting the money into Embracer. But there could be things like that where they're seeing the gaming market cool a little bit in certain areas, And so maybe, again, Bossa Studios could have just missed a drum beat. So Otacon says how they stay afloat this long. Yeah, that's kind of, again, looking at specifically at the Bossa Studios model. Some of the things that were said were kind of weird. Surgeon Simulator 2 came out in 2021. It has not had like a ton of patches. I mean, the last time they patched it was April of 2022. The reviews. So right now on OpenCritic, Surgeon Simulator 2 is a 69. On Metacritic, it's a 70. Steam user reviews. I thought I had those down here in the notes somewhere, but Steam user reviews. I swore I took that note down. Steam user reviews are mixed, and so I think they were in like the 60s for overall, but their most recent reviews were down in like the 50s, and a lot of people are bothered. Let me make sure I'm not getting that mixed up with another game. I thought it's weird. I don't have my notes here. I also pivoted from where I was taking my notes though, so I think this was the game that at the beginning of 2023. There were a lot of disgruntled people on Steam because the multiplayer, the co-op, doesn't work. Some bug cropped up out of nowhere. I don't know where that was driven because they didn't patch the game. So theoretically, they shouldn't have touched multiplayer. But there's a problem with that, and they've gotten a lot of negative reviews as of late. So again, I don't really know that there's anything like severely impacting their business, other than maybe funding, because they are working on a new project. They are working on this project called Lost Skies. The ad copy on Lost Skies reads, is a cooperative survival adventure for 1 to 6 players set amongst the clouds in a vast sky of floating islands. Find and craft ancient technology, build your own skyship, brave ferocious storms, and battle giant threats that await beyond the horizon. Other ad copy that I found about the game: using grappling hooks, paragliders, and customizable airships, announced earlier in 2023 for release in 2024. It shares a lot of DNA with the developers' previous MMO project, Worlds Adrift, which shut down in 2019. So it looks like even back then they were having problems with costs as far as maintaining an MMO and putting enough staff on the new game in terms of the total amount of operational costs that they could support in terms of salary for people at the company. So I don't, it didn't seem, other than that, other than just the size of being a 60-person-ish, studio, it didn't seem like they had a ton of costs that would have necessarily led to layoffs. Of course, everything now is challenging, so I'm not necessarily questioning that. I'm just questioning, what increasing operational costs is, as far as their business model were they engaged in, that would have sent things spiraling in a way that would have led to a layoff of 20 people, other than, again, simply the cost of keeping a studio afloat and the rising cost of employee salaries. For the game in development, one thing that I've talked about that drives costs, I've built this model on Twitter, it's out there. It seems of late there's been a lot of questions again about, why are video games so expensive? And I mean, before I get to that, Otacon Ocelot mentioned smaller studio with less big wigs with smaller salary. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what you would think would be the model. It's not a ton of executives running around at a small outfit like that. So again, I think cost could have been a problem. I just don't necessarily know that operational costs would have necessarily been the thing, except what I was about to comment about the operational costs associated with Otacon mentions Cough Bungee. The operational costs associated with a game, in that context, you would call operational costs service costs. So, what I was starting to say before is it seems like there's been a lot of questions recently about the cost of AAA games and why they're so expensive, and claims that Sony doesn't need to be spending as much money and blah blah blah. Right? Part of the thing that needs to be understood. So first of all, the model, constructing a cost estimate for what it costs to build a video game really isn't that difficult. I've done it multiple times. There's models out on my Twitter account. First of all, you start with, if you're talking about a AAA game, you simply start with a staff of 300 people, maybe plus, times their salary, right, for 5 years of the project. And when you average salaries, you're going to talk about somewhere between 90 and I would say 120K. I've tended to, personally, in my business model, in my pricing models, I've used north of 100K. Your high-end developers your developers and then your high-end developers are going to be making six-figure salaries. Your sharpshooters, right? These people who are very small in number around the industry, who you have to call in kind of the final 2 years of the project, who command very high salaries, are going to cost, a significant amount. Your creative director, your producer, those type of people. Now you're going to have other staff, your QA testers, your artists, who maybe tend not to have as high a salary. They may be south of six figures. But that's where you're going to start. But the other things that go along with making a AAA game, particularly if you're a studio that is not backed by a big corporation that has a lot of production infrastructure, is you're going to pay for booth time, right, in a studio to record your voice actors. You're going to pay for studio time if you're doing mocap. So you have tons of services that if you don't organically maintain them within your organization, you're going to pay for them. You're going to pay for an engine. You're going to pay royalty fees, right, for sales on top of that engine if you're using Unity, if you're using Unreal. So there are other costs associated that culminate in kind of the buildup of these. Even if your corporation organically does maintain something such as Frostbite, like maintains your engine, or maintains a service studio. Like I want to say PlayStation had one that they just shut down last year, which I think was their visual effects studio, which did various particle effects and things for all of their studios. There might still be a cost with that. That's an internal pass-through cost, meaning, if again, I won't use a game model, but I'll use a movie model, right? If you're part of Lucasfilm, right, and you're shooting a movie, and let me walk that back. If you're an external studio and you're shooting a movie and you contract Industrial Light and Magic to do your special effects, right? You're going to pay a cost for that, and that cost is going to be inclusive of the cost for their labor, but plus you're going to pay the pass-through cost, right? You're going to pay fringe, you're going to pay profit margin, you're going to pay whatever. So they're going to charge you a price that's charged to an external commercial customer. If you are part of LucasArts, or maybe even if you're part of Disney, and you're going to use ILM to do your visual effects, the way that works on the accounting books is you're still that is still going to come out of your budget. You're still going to pay for that service. It's not going to be given to you. Unless you're something like Xbox, where the cloud services and the Azure technology that you lean on are given to you, and that cost is not put on your books. That's still going to be a cost to you. It's just going to be reduced. You're not going to pay the same amount of money as an external commercial partner. You're not going to pay fringe. You're not going to pay profit margin, right? All this other stuff. So that's still a cost to you internally, and it's still part of your budget, and it still comes off of your books. So. But if you're a commercial company, you're paying that cost, right, plus, right, all of the things that are associated with you being an external and commercial customer. So those types of things will drive costs for an outfit like Boston Studios. Getting music done, right, is something that you don't maintain that talent, that skill set internally and organically, so you have to contract out for it. So those are types of things that could be operational costs as well. If those costs are spiraling, then that could, for a game that's in development like Lost Skies, that could, definitely be part of the causality that they were talking about. Surgeon Simulator came out in September 2021, as I kind of talked about, has mixed reviews on Steam, 69% overall. Haven't taken a backslide due to lack of support. Yeah, so this was the note. It's jumbled up. Sorry, all the stuff that I pre-scripted. The last patch was April 2022. Multiplayer is not working well due to a bug that cropped up in 2023. That hasn't been fixed. So that could be, like I said, part of their challenge envelope. Bossa are owned by Washington, USA-based Tiny Build. Tiny Build is a company who had other subsidiaries, Banner Saga and Pillars of Eternity 2 publisher Versus Evil, which closed doors in December with all of their staff laid off. So Tiny Build has had other subordinate components of its enterprise recently shuttered as well. Otacon mentions, I love Horizon, Gears of War, TLU quality, expensive games, but I put more time into Dead Cells than any game across PS4, Switch, and PS5. Budgets should level out. Games take forever to make. Yep, I can see that, Otacon. I don't know that profile necessarily, is the same for all demographics across the gaming market. I think, there are lots of people. I mean, you're the type of consumer. I hate to put bias into it, but you're the type of consumer that I like, right? I say gamers need to play indie games. Gamers need to play AA games. There's a reason these games aren't around, and they aren't around in volume, and it's because people stop buying them and people stop playing them. So, every time somebody makes the complaint, hey, games cost too much, typically what I do is I go to Metacritic and I hit them with the list of, okay, these are all the indie and AAA games that were rated an 80 or above in the last publishing year, right? And that will typically be some number of like 150 games, right, per year, probably closer to 200. Usually I'll give them like the first 20 or 25, and I'll say, okay, go down this list and tell me how many you played. Like, if you're complaining about how much games cost, then take a look at what you're spending money on, and if it pans out, as I suspect is the case, that a bulk of what you're playing, or at least 50% of what you're playing, or even 30% of what you're playing, isn't AA or AAA, then you're part of the reason why game costs are going up, right? Because you're creating the demand signal for them, and you're telling the industry that there's not the demand signal for AA and in indie games. The industry is not just going to make AA and indie games just because. They're not going to make it because, AAA games are expensive. If AAA games are expensive, but that's what people are asking for, that's what they're going to make. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate Otacon, what you're doing. I suspect, I talk to a ton of gamers, right? You hang out on the Brat podcast. We have plenty of people who come by that podcast, and that I think, I talk about this type of gamer all the time, but the gamer who only plays and is only conscious of what is on the front page of Metacritic. Like literally, you go to the second page of Metacritic, they don't even know what those games are. It's a problem, and I constantly go back to. I mean, I hate to say it, and people hate to hear me say it, is we're part of the problem, right? The product distribution of the type of game that's coming out on the market is based on the demand signal that the market is giving to it. We're giving the market that demand signal. So if you want more indie games and you want more AA games, start paying for them. And by the way, I hate to tell you, I don't necessarily know that consuming them in Game Pass is driving the demand signal that you want, because that doesn't net an individual developer the same unit cost as a sale of a game. Maybe it comes out in the wash. It definitely de-risks their entire risk profile and envelope and their math for what is deterministic revenue that they're gaining, but it's just not equivalent, right? If you sell 100 licenses of a game at $70 a pop, $60 a pop, $50, $40 a pop, whatever, it's just not the equivalent of what you may get for that same number of licenses, right, for Microsoft, because you're going to have royalties and incentives based on people's consumption packed into it. And if those numbers don't pan out, then you're coming out downside. So it's just not the same math. Again, unfortunately, I mean, the reality is if you want AA and you want indie games, and you want them more so than these AAA games that people are running around saying it's not sustainable, and all that kind of narrative and rhetoric, then make a difference in kind of how you spend your money as a consumer. So a couple of notes in the chat. Innate, it's nice if that works out for you, but I personally don't tend to vibe 20th repeatable games like that. I'm now a roguelike, or Metroidvania fan, etc. I get why people love them, but it's not my jam. Otacon says, I agree. I'm glad RoboCop getting sales from that AA mid-price range. And Innate says, I do have other indie-level games I like, but nothing to the degree people play games like Dead Cells or Risk of Rain 2. Next news story. Now, I'm actually going to take a break and grab a drink here in a second. So let me go ahead and bring this up on screen. Okay, next news story. Samsung will certify controllers optimized for game streaming on its smart TVs. PDP will show off the program's first certified gamepad at CES 2024. So it's a running theme that's going on in the news cycle right now. If you're not plugged in and you're not aware, CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, which actually E3 used to actually be a subcomponent of CES, but CES is going down next week. So it is the consumer electronic industry's big showcase every year. Happens at the beginning of the year. Again, it's their kind of equivalent of their E3 if you're somebody who's more familiar with the gaming side of things. It's where you will get a lot of announcements for like new TVs, new laptops, new PCs, and we're expecting to see a ton of AI stuff announced out there. several manufacturers are going to be announcing new TVs, new monitors. I've talked on Twitter about Samsung's new OLEDs. I'm going to talk about one other vendor's new OLEDs tonight. NVIDIA, we expect that NVIDIA is going to announce a couple of its Super series of cards there next week. So again, it's out in Las Vegas. We expect that there's going to be somebody, putting stuff up on the dome. One of the big three, one of either Apple, Microsoft, or Google is going to announce something big out there. I suspect it's going to be Microsoft. Obviously, Microsoft is going to announce a ton of AI stuff. I suspect it's probably not going to be Apple because Apple has its own announcement cycle. I suspect it's going to be something. I'm hoping it's something hardware based for Microsoft. I'm not expecting anything necessarily Xbox related, but I'm a hardware guy. Software product announcements are great, but I prefer hardware announcements. I'm hoping that these indicators that I've heard that one of the big three companies is going to be announcing is going to have a major announcement at CES. I'm hoping. It's something hardware related with a new device that's coming out. So we will see. In the meantime, Innate mentions Sony going mini LED. The CES is about to be wild. Otacon mentions typing on a laptop. I think something I read about Innate was screwed up because he was typing on his phone. So again, Samsung will certify controllers optimized for game streaming on its smart TVs. Samsung is looking to boost the game streaming ecosystem around its smart TVs with a certification program. Ahead of CES 2024 in Los Angeles, the company today unveiled Designed for Samsung Gaming Hub, which gives third-party accessory makers an official designation that their gear works with the platform. The program's first licensed gamepad from PDP is available for pre-order. PDP, who are makers of the Victrix line of custom controllers, and they're competitors with like SCUF. Their controllers, the Victrix line of controllers, goes for about $180 for Xbox and about $200 for PS4, PS5. In comparison with where kind of PDP is positioned on the market with Victrix, Victrix generally gives you a finer level of control with dedicated trigger stops, exchangeable D-pads, different length thumbsticks, and roughly double the battery life of the SCUF Reflex Pro. The SCUF Reflex Pro is for people who don't want to give up their adaptive triggers and the haptic feedback, because the SCUF has those, but the Victrix doesn't. And the SCUF Reflex Pro also has higher quality rear remappable paddles. So just to kind of give you a sense of what PDP does and kind of how their products are positioned. The Samsung design for Samsung Gaming Hub allows manufacturers to put a badge that they can put on their products. Sorry, just taking the browser out of reading mode for people who are following along on the screen. But the Samsung Gaming Hub already works with most standard Bluetooth peripheral gamepads. But these gamepads do provide dedicated shortcut buttons. So if you think about your Xbox controller or your PlayStation controller, it has dedicated shortcut buttons that are for specific functions for that hardware. So you have the share buttons, you have the options and the menu buttons. Those are specific to their interaction and interface with the Xbox or the PlayStation 5. The Samsung Gaming Hub buttons have those as well. I can't remember. It has a button for launching the hub, a button for TV power, and a button for volume. So again, like the DualSense and the Xbox 1914 controller, you have similar kind of dedicated buttons. Samsung Gaming Hub includes Game Pass, GeForce Now, Luna, Boosteroid, and AntStream, which are just some of the services that are available in Samsung Gaming Hub that you would be able to access and have a better experience with these dedicated controllers. This is the first product from PDP. The first product coming from PDP is the Replay wireless controller. Has 40 hours of battery life. Has a working distance range of about 30 feet. And like I said, has a button for launching the hub, TV power, and volume. It's up for pre-order now on PDP's website for about $50. It will also be coming to Amazon, and Best Buy will carry it as well. So I don't know if that's the thing what I thought was interesting about this article was just that it's a little more of a lean forward from Samsung about really trying to make the Samsung TV gaming ecosystem a thing. Obviously, there's been a lot of ad copy coming from Xbox with regards to their games you can play on Samsung TVs. Samsung is a big vendor. They've got a super huge footprint in the cell phone space. They've come to much greater prominence in the TV space. I think at the expense of Sony televisions. If you remember, Sony Bravia televisions used to really be a thing. I don't think you really hear them mentioned as much with nearly as much brand cash as Samsung TVs. The introduction of OLED screens has been huge. Samsung gets a big leg up from the fact that it makes its own displays. It doesn't get them from ODMs. LG also makes its own displays. It has a display manufacturing arm of the company, but hasn't gained. I think there have been, obviously, the C1, the C2, the C line have been huge with their HDMI 2.1 implementations and their rise to prominence in this generation of games, but Samsung OLEDs have really been on the rise. I mean, really since the Xbox 360 generation. And like I said, kind of just before that was when kind of Bravia TVs were in vogue, and as Bravia TVs have gone down, I think we've seen Samsung OLED come up. In addition to the headwinds, or gains that Samsung has made in the PC display space as well. I have two I think they're 5s, the 32-inch curved screen 1440p monitors. Their Odyssey line of displays, is well known in the PC space and is really well liked. They're one of the vendors that makes one of those super wide, 40-inch or whatever, ultra wide displays as well. I don't have any of their ultra wide displays. I have an Asus ultra wide display and a Gigabyte ultra wide. But the Samsung ones are pretty nice as well. Okay, let's go on to the next news story, which is about one of my most anticipated games here at the beginning of the year. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown runs at 60 frames per second or more on every console, showing the value of putting the Nintendo Switch first. The story up over at Games Radar by Khan Serin. Ubisoft has revealed the specs for Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, and it seems that optimizing the game for the Nintendo Switch has given all consoles a boost. To quickly catch you up, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown sees the series' signature time-traveling puzzles and desperate parkour through a side-scrolling lens, with the team even adding a Metroidvania twist, stepping off from the popularity of Hollow Knight and other games in the genre. It was then unsurprising to hear that the game was built first for the Nintendo Switch, a platform that's fostered countless Metroidvania hits. Innate mentions, I think 34-inch ultra-wide is where I'm stopping. Yeah, I have these two 34-inch ultra-wides. I also have a 43-inch. That it became like my primary HDMI 2.1 monitor. I took the 4K television that was down here and moved that upstairs. So I have this 43-inch down here now, which I use as a PC monitor. It is a PC monitor. It's an Asus. It is a PC monitor. It's not a TV. But that just became a more efficient way for me to approach displays. But yeah, I think I'm, a 4K kind of large screen display primarily for consoles. But within the 34-inch ultra wides, I think is where I am as well. I have one of those like super wide, like 40-inch things at work, and I can't stand it. I haven't had the heart to tell my boss because he was really jazzed about getting those for us. It's just too big. But okay, back to Prince of Persia. So Ubisoft let their performance envelopes for consoles and PCs out today. That's where this news story was generated. So it runs at 1080p 60 on the Switch when it's docked, 720p 60 in handheld. It runs at 60 frames per second on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. So, pretty impressive that it runs on last-gen hardware. But again, here we are in 2024 with games still being made for last-gen consoles, which just shows, to me, in my opinion, it shows the impact of the pandemic and the fact that everybody didn't just flip over and upgrade at volume in the ways we've seen in the past. From last-gen Xbox and PlayStation to next-gen Xbox and PlayStation. Despite what the PlayStation 5's, sales numbers are and the way it's keeping pace, roughly, it's only a week behind, like, the PlayStation 4 sales. I think maybe that's driven by a lot of new customers, and I don't necessarily know that old customers have transitioned over as quickly. But on PS5 and Xbox Series X, it does 4K 120. I have not heard, so I heard these performance profiles. I have not heard that there are performance and quality modes, which is one of my kind of hot buttons of what I want. I want to have the choice as the consumer to run at 60 frames per second or 4K 120. Don't dictate that to me. So I would hope and assume that there's the option in this game. The Series S is at 1440p 60. So want to take a look at the PC specs as well. This is actually what I found more interesting out of this today. Sorry, grabbed the wrong screen. So across this line, these columns from minimum to recommended to ultra, what I found interesting was the AMD GPU for the ultra specs. Let me see if I can blow that up a little so people can see it. The AMD GPU for the Ultra Series specs is the 5000 series card, the 5500 XT. So those were the cards that came out as head-to-head competitors against the 2000 series RTX cards. But the NVIDIA systems only need a 1000 series RTX card. So you could look at that like, NVIDIA kind of, can run on a generation earlier card than the AMD can. Jeffrey Giordano just came in the chat, mentions Go Lakers. So I'm not sure if that was for you or Otacon, or maybe you guys are Lakers fans. But at any rate, so that's one thing to take into consideration if you're still on a 1000 series card, as lots of people are. GTX card, I should say. Then you can run the game, whereas people on AMD Silicon need to be a generation forward. On PC, the frame rate is not locked, and so while the game will obviously run in 4K, and here these are the specs for it running at 60 frames per second. If you have hardware better than that, if you have better CPUs and GPUs, then you should get better performance. These specs really aren't anything like flabbergasting. I mean, even for Ultra, you need a 6th generation Intel Core i7. My lowest end Intel system in the studio is a 12th generation Alder Lake. So I think there's plenty of people running that and Intel is 2 generations ahead of that on the market. So and then for Ryzen, you need a 1st gen Ryzen CPU. So on the market right now, we're 3 generations ahead from that with the 2000, 3000, 5000 and 7000 series. I guess 4 generations. And I run 2 7000 series boxes in the studio here. So again, it's an easy leap. So shouldn't overly challenge anyone. The thing that I thought was most interesting about this is a DirectX 11 game. It is not DirectX 12, which means no ray tracing. Now, do you really need ray tracing in a 2D Metroidvania? Maybe no, not necessarily. I mean, whatever. But the point is, it's not there and it's not going to be available. So it's an interesting thing to take note of. I find that sometimes these days, even like with Starfield, I had to kind of have to pull threads, right, to find out if a game has ray tracing or not, or wait for somebody to get a game and see if they have it in their hands to see if it has the option there. So I know that there's a lot of controversy going on around about global illumination, and my personal feeling is like, look, you can think of global illumination as ray tracing, but the point is that doggone well when people say ray tracing, they mean dynamic, and so that's what they're looking for, and that's what most people really mean in connotation when they reference that term. And so saying that a game does global illumination and so therefore it does ray tracing, you know damn well that's not what people are talking about. So let's not play that game. This game launches on January 18th. For people who are subscribed to Ubisoft Plus and people who pre-order the digital deluxe edition, you get access to it 3 days in early access, so you'll have access to it on the 15th. The game will be on PC, Switch, PS5, PS4, Xbox Series X, Xbox Series S. With 4 years of the generation and saying Xbox Series S still is a problem. Xbox One, and it's also available on Amazon Luna. Ubisoft has also shared an accessibility deep dive, which digs into some of the key features and considerations the team have taken regarding accessibility options and features. Their features include large text, no color feedback, customizable difficulty where you can adjust the parameters such as enemy health, damage, and dodge windows individually. So those are some pretty nice accessibility features. I'm hoping that it'd be interesting to hear some feedback from people who use those features and need them, whether or not they're sufficient to allow them to play the game. Prince of Persia: Lost Crown was announced at Summer Games Fest, where it also featured a 20-minute gameplay video posted by Game Informer soon after the announcement. During the same time frame, Jeff Keighley had announced that he played a build of the Switch version of the game, and so now here we are, just 6, 7, 8 months hence, with on the eve of the game coming out. The game is by Ubisoft Montpellier, which was established in 1994, most famously known for Rayman and the Beyond Good and Evil, and the Rayman series and Beyond Good and Evil. It was about 350 employees back in 2019. That studio also, though, surprisingly, I was surprised to find this, also did Ghost Recon Advanced Warfare, or GRAW, as those of us who were fledglings in the Xbox 360 generation, you like to call it. That game was out in 2006. They also did Valiant Hearts: The Great War, and supposedly, they're also working on Beyond Good and Evil 2. So we'll see if we get that game to come out anytime soon. Next news story, I'll go ahead and bring it up on the screen, then I'm going to get another drink. This is where we're going to talk a little bit more about displays. So, Jeffrey, I also forgot to mention, thanks so much for coming through the live stream. We appreciate you. Although I don't know if anybody here is Lakers fans. This news story over on PC Gamer by Jeremy Laird. ASRock tears it up with new 520Hz and 400Hz gaming monitors. And I quote, ASRock has announced a pair of ultra-fast LCD gaming monitors for CES, one hitting 520Hz, the other 400Hz. It's arguably the latter that's most intriguing, combining that 400Hz refresh, as it does with 1440p resolution via the 27-inch IPS panel. IPS, really nice panels. Not necessarily the fastest for gaming, but for a lot of people, they prefer the overall, balance between picture quality and speed in an IPS panel. There was a time that I only bought IPS panels. But I've since gone, in going to ultra wides and some other types of displays, I will sometimes go with a VA panel. That's the ASRock Phantom Gaming PG27 QFW20 2A, and so it's not mentioned in the ad copy. Generally, the way, if you shop for monitors frequently, generally the way it works is if a certain spec is not mentioned in the ad copy, that typically means that the game doesn't have it, that the monitor doesn't have it, and so the fact that the resolution isn't mentioned with regard to the other monitor that runs at 520Hz, it is probably not a 1440p monitor, it is probably a 1080p monitor. For competitive multiplayer PvP players, of which I include myself, I used to religiously abide by the 25-inch or smaller monitor, 1080p, running at at least 120 hertz, but I also had 240 hertz panels. I was very surprised. There are 27-inch high-speed panels out on the market that are 1080p. That's just a weird blend for me. I don't know why I would want a screen that large at lower resolution, running that fast. The whole point of the philosophy behind being on a smaller screen is so that you can keep the entire kind of battle area like in one singular field of vision without kind of needing to move your eyes, or having things happening out on the periphery that you're not keeping up with. Innate mentions these hertz are getting out of control. Yes, I agree, Innate. And Brap is here, I guess, fresh from Crossfire. I think I got Jeffrey Giordano's mention of the Lakers earlier mixed up when I was trying to say Crossfire and said Crossover. So Do you need a 400 or 520 hertz panel? I don't think so, personally. And in fact, I have 165 hertz and 144 hertz panels. I had 240 hertz panels. In this most recent era of the studio, I decided that I did not need like things as high as the 240 hertz panels. And even now with the 165s and 144s, because of something Slow-Mo mentioned to me, and actually something that a mutual or somebody mentioned to me on Twitter, I have recently been getting away from running at 1080p resolution or 1440p resolution at like medium settings, so that I could get 165 frames, and have been like cranking all of my graphical settings up so that maybe I'm only getting 110 or 120 frames, but I have all the settings turned up to ultra, like except one or two. Brad mentions who asked for 240 hertz panels. I mean, since hertz have been going up, and last year they were at like 360. There were more 360 hertz panels that came out. Now we're at 520, 400 hertz panels. I don't know who needs these things. I guess, future proofing, I guess if you want to. It is nice when you can, I have games that I will set the frame rate cap at 300, knowing that I'll never hit that, but just to make sure that my GPU is uncaged, right, as much as possible. But, generally, the only time you're going to be running at the speeds is, if you're running at 1080p, which I guess some people do, but I don't know who needs it. It's good bragging rights, and I mean, I hate to say it, but lots of my PC gaming brethren love their bragging rights for specs. So, but the sweet spot for resolution for me is 1440p. That is generally what I always play at. What I want to see now from a market perspective is let's get some more IPS panels on the market at some of these really great bargain prices that I saw some of the VA panels for, a year ago, running at 165 hertz, I think, or so. I would be fine with that. Have good HDR implementation, by the way. The problem with a lot of these monitors is the HDR implementation is really poor. The nits are pretty low. They don't really follow, give you the headroom for a really great, a brightness level from an HDR perspective, and color gamut, right, is also something that tends to not be great on these kind of consumer level monitors. You really have to skew towards a more professional type of monitor to get, a decent color gamut. So that's more of, I would be interested more so in things like that than worrying about whether or not the monitor runs at 420 or 500, but, whatever. Enid says, it's funny some of the people I see with the most insane setups be getting clapped against 1080p 60, yeah. And Brad says, does it give an advantage to choose 240 hertz? So, I don't know. What I will say is, what I was saying before is, there was an era where, like I said, I religiously followed the small monitor, very high speed, and I had convinced myself that that high frame rates made me a better player. And I think within a certain range, that's true. And where I'm settling down at now, and where I'm saying I'm backing off of the frames, I definitely feel like 120 frames helps my gameplay. But it's kind of like the bottle of wine analogy, right? You have a lot of people who say, hey, the difference between a $30 bottle of wine and a $10 bottle of wine, that's huge, right? But the difference between a $60 bottle of wine and a $30 bottle of wine, not that much. And I kind of feel the same way. I feel like at, up to 120 hertz definitely makes a difference to me. But the difference between 120 and 165, like I don't know that it's really doing that much for me. Maybe a lot of that is myth. Where I started kind of changing that formula too was I was just kind of constantly reading more and more of other opinions and other things and other professionals who review monitors. Where I also kind of settled with this whole thing about small monitors, super high refresh rates. I think that's also a lot of professional gamers, professional PvP gamers, who that was like the pinnacle of monitor performance at the time when they were kind of coming up, and they just never wanted to change because they were winning. Look, if somebody was at the top of their game in an era where getting a 1080p 120 hertz monitor, 240 hertz monitor, whatever was goated, then they're not interested in trying to mix up that formula to play with 27-inch monitors or 1440p or whatever. And I just came down and settled on, okay, I don't think that that's so much like the formula. I don't think I play any worse on a 30, right? When Forte mentioned to me, hey, you should go to ultra wide. And I experimented getting one ultra wide. I didn't feel like I played any worse on an ultra wide versus like a 25-inch monitor. So I think a lot of that is just kind of, gamers who wind up getting stuck in their ways, and I don't think any of those things are necessarily like religious thumb rules that anyone has to abide by. Going on to the next news story. Customers left cold as Fanatec says Sony validation is delaying Club Sport DD Plus wheelbase. We expected to receive this approval sooner. So this story over on PC Gamer, and this is definitely going to hit a very limited crowd of niche, but it's one of the niches that I live in. So I'm a big racing game fan. The pinnacle of racing setups is to have what's called a direct drive wheelbase. And so if you kind of talk about like the continuum of products that are out there and available for racing setups, wheel and pedals obviously is kind of your start. Then you get to this point of the product lines where you can get just a wheel base, and then you can buy specialized wheels so that you can swap out wheels. And so like Thrustmaster is my preferred brand that I use right now. Thrustmaster makes, and I have one of their wheel bases, the T300 RS. You can swap wheels on it, so you can get like a Formula One wheel, a rally racing wheel, there are Ferrari racing wheels, things like that. So some of those are just cosmetic, but then some of the ones like the Formula One and the rally racing wheel are actually like functional, and they're designed to like be better suited for that particular style of racing. These direct drive wheels, and so the way these things work is a wheel base on the lower end, on the kind of more generic consumer end, are typically belt driven or gear driven. Gear driven being a slightly higher product line, and my T300 RS I think is a gear driven wheelbase. But then you get into these direct drive wheels, and what these basically have is they basically have little teeny tiny motors, right, and engines inside of them. So it is literally like a steering wheel attached to an engine in a car. They're just very miniaturized, and so it gives you the highest level of fidelity of force feedback and feel for the video game simulation, right, of you driving the car and the player. So Fanatec is making one of these and has run into some problems trying to get it past a Sony validation. So new Sony peripheral implementation has a lot of security features in the electronics, and so it's a slightly more complicated approval process to get these things through. These Fanatec wheels went up for pre-order in September. They were touted to be delivered to consumers in December. They didn't get the approval in December, and so now you have people who have paid for their wheels who haven't got their product. And Fanatec is, trying to do the tap dance to tell people that their deliveries have been delayed. So Brad mentions Hamp have to jump. 2 kids having a meltdown. No problem, Brad. Thanks a lot for swinging through. We appreciate you. So the other thing with these direct drive wheels is they're incredibly expensive. Thrustmaster makes one that I've been eyeballing. That's $600. But these things scale up to $1,300 for the wheelbase. Then you're paying for the wheel and then the pedals, because all these things come ad hoc in our a la carte, right? And so you buy the base, then the pedals, then the wheel, and they're all sold separately. So you can get up to setups that cost $3,000. The other thing that was interesting is that I came across is in kind of pulling the thread and trying to understand this better. The whole certification process for peripherals is a whole institution in and of itself. And I think I mentioned on Twitter, I think this is a thing that a lot of gamers don't understand. So the chipsets inside these controllers, what happens when Xbox and PlayStation are gearing up for their next generation, and they go to their suppliers and they contract out for who's going to supply these chips. Part of the deal is, as they're negotiating for the prices, right? Let's say the vendor wants to give Xbox the chips for $100. Xbox says, hey, That's right. These chips you guys sell to everyone else for $100, you need to give us a discount, because once they become the baseline for the next gen Xbox Series controller, we're also going to require anybody who comes to us to license for a third party controller, we're going to tell them they have to buy your chips, right, for security purposes, and to provide the same level of quality for your third party chip. That's one of the qualifiers for being officially licensed. And so I believe these chipset vendors are then, have the promise of, okay, we're going to send you additional business. And so that's part of how it gets the price gets negotiated. I mentioned that speculation because that's the way it works everywhere else when you're making supply deals. So I thoroughly believe it happens there. But the point is that for third-party vendors who come to go through this validation process that Fanatec is trying to get through, Max Wainscott has swung through. Thanks a lot, Max, for swinging through the live stream. We appreciate you. Mentions, does Thrustmaster make any quality products? I know their HOTAS efforts ain't well regarded. So matter of opinion, right? And again, PC gamers, FGC, nope, don't like that. So I love my PC gamer brethren, my PCMR people, but you have people in the community who have very strenuous opinions on particular vendors. I have seen things where I've seen Thrustmaster, not well liked, but I've also seen things where I've seen Cytec not well liked, Mad Catz not well liked, as Logitech has gobbled up a lot of them, general distrust of Logitech and what they were doing with things. Where I've come to settle down after, being in particular a PC gamer for, I guess I'd say probably close to 30 years at this point. I would say if I listened to everyone, I would have no vendor, because there's pockets of extreme resistance to all of those vendors for the peripherals that I like, somewhere, everywhere. The only thing I can say is for wheel and pedals, I am happy with Thrustmaster and prefer their products. I've used Logitech wheels. My big, huge problem with Logitech in general is I've just never liked their software. Logitech G Suite is a lot better now, but just across 3 decades of using products, I have never liked their software. The Thrustmaster software has in general been a lot easier to deal with across multiple iterations of the Windows operating system. And from a price perspective, I've just settled down on where, I'm fine with the Thrustmaster feature set, right, for the price. The Logitech wheels, like I said, I haven't particularly liked their software. And then I feel like every other kind of wheel and pedal manufacturer, you start getting off into the kind of periphery and the niche and out of the mainstream, and I get worried about the level of support. So I know Fanatec has a good reputation, but I just haven't seen as wide a variance of Fanatec products that are available, and not at the prices that I like. Where I feel like Fanatec has some very super high level products, but then they have some really low end cheap products that aren't like in my area of interest from a quality perspective. So again, Max, I think it's it all depends on who you listen to. HOTAS perspective, the Warthog, again, I've heard split opinions on that, right? Where its implementation is great as long as you have one that is reliable. But then I have seen where like there's a chunk of people who run into reliability problems. And so anybody who has a Warthog that has worked absolutely loves it and swears by it. But like the 50% or so of people who have gotten a Warthog and it hasn't panned out don't like it. But other Thrustmaster flight control systems, the T16000, I think it's a fine quality product. It's definitely not as high end. The Cytec products, they're Logitech products now. The Cytec, I still call them Cytec. The Cytec products are nice, but they tend to sometimes not have the features that Thrustmaster does, and then quality and them being wrapped up in Logitech and having to go through Logitech G is sometimes questionable as well. I tend to like both of. I have Cytec flight control systems and I have Thrustmaster flight control systems. There are pluses and minuses to both, but neither one have like a plus or a pro or con that is so vastly makes it outweigh the other one. So. Sorry, I got sidetracked a little bit, but it's a subject area that I'm into and spend a lot of time in. So, but going back to kind of how how the sausage is made on how controllers and peripherals get approved. Like I said, it's a very convoluted process. The other thing that I should mention, and this goes back to when I talked about looking at Forza Motorsport and kind of where its development cycle was and how I saw and heard things or didn't see and hear things that made me nervous about how that game was progressing. One of the things I mentioned was I hadn't heard anything about approval. Like 2 or 3 months before launch, I hadn't heard anything about approval for wheels and pedals and a compatibility chart. Whereas I looked back at previous versions of Forza Motorsport and saw that like a year before the game was coming out, that type of chart was out. Well, part of the thing that some of these investigative reports mention is how when you're working with a platform owner, when you're working with Xbox or you're working with PlayStation, there are like weekly engineering meetings on the front end of you getting your product approved. And I'm like, yeah, there's no way that level of activity is happening and we're not hearing about it if everything is hunky-dory and everything's fine. And so that was, to me, was an indicator that seems to be corroborated by this, that the level of activity involved with like getting these types of things approved. So then there's a lot of testing. The PlayStation peripherals actually, at least wheel and pedals, actually get sent to Japan, to their test facility in Japan to be tested. So like I said, this is really rigorous. And I think the thing that's also surprising, as gamers, we often like slag these things when they come out and we say, oh, that's wired. Or we go, oh, that doesn't have haptic feedback, or it doesn't have the DualSense features. And I'm like, well, the thing that's coming out of some of these background reports that, again, like don't get publicly talked about and knowledge doesn't get widespread, is that's because sometimes Xbox and PlayStation reserve some features for themselves that they don't let other people implement, right? So there's a cost associated with implementing a Xbox wireless controller that a lot of third-party manufacturers don't want to have. One of these things that this other article mentions is how if you're a smaller outfit, it's difficult to get approval. It's difficult to then utilize a lot of the features because of the licensing costs associated with them and the parts that Xbox or PlayStation may tell you have to buy, or just because they're not allowing people to use those features. So Xbox does let people license their wireless features, but it has a cost associated with it, and so a lot of people don't. And that's why when you see Xbox controllers that are wireless, they tend to be from the larger outfits. They tend to be like from Razer, from Scuf, from some of these other people who are willing to pay that price. But from smaller outfits, not so much. You have I think Moga and the Pro. I can't remember what they're called, but there are some of these lower end controllers that are wired for Xbox. Lots of wired controllers that are available. I have a Mirror's Edge. Branded and stylized Xbox controller that's wired. So that's one of their things. On the PlayStation side, they don't license out the haptics, and then when people look at saying, "Hey, I don't want to pay the money for the haptics," or PlayStation's not even letting us have the haptics, the cost and the point of implementing like low-end generic Rumble isn't there because the software signals that are sent to the controller don't activate Rumble. So the API isn't there to support that functionality of a lower end force feedback feature set. And so there's no point in them implementing that. So just a lot of little nuggets in this other article that I pulled the thread on and was looking around when I was doing the research that kind of paint the picture of, getting a third-party peripheral, like is it all Tiffany couplings and roses through, and also kind of, points people in the direction of, you may just be better off in general just always going first party. I don't even know where I am in the agenda. I want to talk a little bit about Nexon's fine, and we only have 2 other stories in the rundown. So let me pull that story up, and then I'm going to grab another drink. Okay, MapleStory publisher Nexon fined record $8.9 million for misleading loot box mechanics. This story over on Rock, Paper, Shotgun by Edwin Evans Thurwell. And I quote, Korean publisher Nexon have been fined 11.6 billion won, around $8.9 million, for secretly altering the drop rates of coveted items in free-to-play MMO gacha game MapleStory. The fine issued by the Korea Fair Trade Commission is the largest penalty ever doled out for violation of South Korea's Act on Consumer Protection in Electronic Commerce. I think the most telling quote in this story, if I could find it from the KFTC, we imposed the largest fine because the cube is a core product of the game MapleStory. The period of the violation is long, and this is the second violation by Nexon following sudden attack. So Nexon is not a favorite company of mine because one of the games that I really liked, Lawbreakers, the Cliff Bleszinski game by, I think it's Boss Games, I think was his outfit in North Carolina. Nexon was publishing it, and then because of various personality conflicts or whatever, or just, arm twisting by Nexon, Boss Key Games was not able to do what they really wanted to do with Lawbreakers. I thought it was a really great multiplayer PvP team-based. I think it was 6v6, so it was kind of in the Overwatch mold, and I think it would have been nice to give Overwatch some competition on the market that maybe would have made Blizzard's kind of handling of their own franchise a little different. But unfortunately, Bosky and Nexon wound up parting ways. They couldn't get along together, and that led to Cliff, exiting the industry for the current time. So just wish that would have turned out nicer, but it did not. And so, at any rate, Nexon got caught up because the KFTC found that their in-game currency cubes that they had been manipulating and kind of sliding in an anti-consumer way towards playing with the drop rate that you would get real rewards for. This is something that they had been caught for before, as the article mentions, and it looks like this has been going on since September 2010. Again, this is the thing, games as a service. One of the things that people don't like about games as a service, I don't like about games as a service, is how they tend to have like 19 different currencies for you to make progress in the game. It's really overly convoluted. But then, we have this recurring theme of the discussion of transparency in games today as well. And this is, one of the things that's problematic. And I think actually in China, when I talked about the Chinese commerce story earlier this week, I was talking about some of these restrictions that they were looking at putting down on games over the holidays. And I think that was one of the things that was in their restrictions was because there were going to be set thresholds for what drop rates for things like this had to be. And in China, one of the things is you have to publicly convey what your drop rates are. I think it might be that way in Korea too. And so this may also be because they were lying about what their drop rates were. And in fact, there were points in this timeline where Nexon said that, oh no, we haven't changed it, when in fact they actually had. So there you go. Doesn't pay to cheat, doesn't pay to lie. As I've seen Call of Duty gamers playing with Cronus's today on Twitter and getting outed. Last news story we're going to talk about is Everspace 2. Again, very niche crowd, so I'll try and go through this one quickly. Just caught my eye because I play Everspace 2. I was happy to see that game come out and decouple itself from its roguelike feature set from the first time around. I think that made uptake on the game, not great for Everspace, but Everspace 2 broke away from that, and I believe is selling a lot better than Everspace was. And I love flight sims, and I hate when the market goes in a direction where we don't get a lot of them because people aren't buying them. So I was glad to see this come out. Everspace 2, this story over on Rock Paper Shotgun as well. Everspace 2 is getting a free Unreal Engine 5 upgrade to make future updates and expansions easier. Rockfish aimed to support joyful Luke Skywalking sim for a long time. So this is a long-term play for Rockfish Games. This story also by Edwin Evans Thirlwell. Rockfish have announced that they're updating Arcade Dogfighter Everspace 2 to run on Unreal Engine 5. The engine rollover will arrive as part of or alongside the game's Incursions update in spring 2024, which includes tweaks and bug fixes, as well as extra legendary items and a new game feature of some description. The idea is less to take advantage of UE5's various whiz-bangs and bell whistles, like the new nanite geometry system, than to grease the launch chutes for future Everspace 2 updates and expansions. Max Wainscott mentions, lack of quality HOTAS options for Elite Dangerous on Xbox was determining factors that pushed me to have a PC built a couple of years ago. Lack of quality HOTAS options for Elite Dangerous on Xbox. Okay, yeah. Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're really a sim head, and you love wheels and pedals and you love flight control systems, as I do, at the end of the day, I mean, you really have to go PC. You know, I mean, it's great that the consoles have more options for those these days. But at the end of the day, if you just want total freedom, so to speak, if you want the widest degree of latitude you can possibly have and the most options available at your fingertips, definitely go towards PC. So, and oh, by the way, you can use your HOTAS with Everspace 2 on PC. So, the main part of the tail of the tape on this story is that them implementing UE5 is not really a matter, as Thurwell mentions, of them, doing a level up, as far as like the graphics and all those things in the game. It's really about the longevity of the development cycle. And the OpEx of maintaining a continuing game. I've recently, some of the games that I've been playing recently are really about, I've really been kind of looking at getting into games that never end. And not necessarily like the PvP shooter stuff that I like, that you can get that effect, but in order to get that effect, you're buying battle passes and other things. But I've been playing Elder Scrolls Skyrim on the Nintendo Switch, and I plan on going back and revisiting No Man's Sky on the Xbox here this weekend as well. And a lot of those are about getting into games like Rockfish is talking about making Everspace 2, which is a continuing game. I don't necessarily think of it as a living game. We have the controversy from the TGAs where Cyberpunk was given the award for, in the game category that most people generally think and consider associated with a type of games as a service game. Inclusive of things like Destiny 2, which does things like, even before they really had battle passes, was doing things like providing incremental content, over a long period of time, and there was a life cycle to the game, and there were episodic and chapter-oriented expansions. Cyberpunk 2077, I wouldn't necessarily say really fit that mold, but that's kind of what they're talking about doing with Everspace 2. I think that's also kind of the voice track that I hear from Starfield as well. And so this notion of flipping it over to UE5 is what I often do a lot of times with my company's software. We often have a discussion of, hey, we need to move to the next technology platform. We went through this with React.js. We went through this with what's the other front end framework that I'm thinking about? Was Angular? I think it was Angular. I'm trying to remember whether it was Angular or React. I think it was Angular that we also hit a nit and a problem with because Angular didn't necessarily have a real upgrade path from 1.0 to 2.0. It was really a matter of just like you would need to recode in Angular 2.0. So that problem with Angular, which is a Google product, is what caused us to flip in a lot of cases over to React, which is really which is a JavaScript framework that really Facebook is the originator of. So you have, but the point is you have inflection points like this in a software development timeline, in a life cycle of software development where you say, hey, we need to level up the platform or shift to this other technology base or this new programming language. And the reason we need to do that isn't necessarily so we can implement new features or so that we bring features along that this new programming language or new version of the programming language or new version of the technology allows, but it's because we have a 5 to 10 year projected life cycle in this product, and we believe that implementing new stuff is going to be easier in that framework. It's not always necessarily about new features, but it's about the fact that you expect and you plan to see like the support for the previous programming language to go down. You expect to see plugins and widgets and other things that developers make from an open source perspective to start to dwindle. And so if you want to be on the thing that's going to have the most support behind it, you want to go ahead and make that technology shift at a point in your timeline where you feel you can accommodate that change, that disruption. And so that's what Everspace 2 is doing here. They're doing the step aside, the technology upgrade, the technology level up to shift to UE5 because they think that's what carries them the furthest into the future and try to maintain this game. So for people who love flight sims, in space sims, again, you love this kind of thing, you love to see it, right? Somebody making that move. So you think that, you believe, we hope that, that we're going to see this game have a lot of longevity. In the chat, Max mentions Warframe has deserved that award for years. I agree, Max. And Otacon mentions have a great one, guys. Thanks a lot, Otacon, for coming through. We appreciate you. Yeah, I agree, Max. I constantly point to Warframe. I think I mentioned it on this new series a few weeks ago that, Warframe is a game that, has, and I forget exactly when it came out. I think it's 14 years. I think it was 2009, I think. Maybe it's definitely at least 10, maybe longer. But they don't pay, they don't charge for, their expansions or their new wave. The content's just there, which means, but I've also seen them, but they were also on the Steam list as one of the highest earning revenue, and I think they were in the gold bracket, where in that scheme I talked about last episode, there's platinum, gold, silver, and bronze. Actually, so I think they're actually part of the silver bracket, I think. But, they make a decent amount of revenue apparently on Steam at least, and that's clearly from people just buying armor, right, right, and weapons out of the store, because they don't charge for the expansions. At least not most of them. I think there may have been one like major expansion that maybe they charge for, but I think in general they don't charge for expansion. So yeah, I don't disagree. Warframe to me is a great example of I think as big of a thing as Destiny 2 has been. I think at the end of the day, Destiny 2's real, Bungie's real feeling of success would really be about if they were able to achieve the longevity of Warframe, and they're not there yet. So, and I don't know that they're going to get there with like kind of some of the recent challenges that they've experienced. So, it'd be interesting to see. As far as what I've been playing recently, I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the show. I've gotten into Elder Scrolls V Skyrim on Nintendo Switch, which is something I've started before, but have never really stuck with. I've started on the Switch. I've started on PC. My most recent knit has been I've been wanting to, like I said, get into games that kind of never end, or games that have like extremely long play loops, just to have, some things to kind of whittle away at in 2024. And so that was the first one that I went after. And then, like I said, this weekend I'm hoping to get some time to turn my attention to No Man's Sky on the Xbox as well, which I have played on PC. I think I've dabbled on console, but I'm planning on spending, a good chunk of time in it over this weekend. For this show, for talking about games, I think the next time I'm going to do one of these is Thursday of next week, so I'm going to take a little downtime. I need to look at my other production schedule and see when I'm going to be doing Let's Plays and live streams and whatnot. I think the most recent bit of content that's up on the channel is there's some Best of Times Dirt Rally 2.0. Best of Times is kind of my series where I just take raw footage normally captured from Shadowplay or from the NVIDIA tool, and just post that. It doesn't have like the intro and outro music and all that kind of stuff. And then versus Let's Plays, there is a Let's Play. The most recent Let's Play, or the ending Let's Play of my arc in Civilization 6 on the Nintendo Switch is up as well. So you guys are definitely free to check that out. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe out there, play the games that you like, come here to talk to me about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Basement Radio Arcade podcast, and one of the co-hosts of the You Have to Keep Going weekly games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. E2KG, which has been on hiatus over the holidays, will be back on Sunday night at 8:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So Osiris Prime, as well as DBQ Hams and I, the core cast of three, should be there. So love to see you guys there if anybody wants to swing through and listen to that podcast as well. For these, like I said, for the next Talking About Games, I'm not planning on doing one until next Thursday night. For anybody who happens to check out for anybody who came through the live stream, we appreciate you. Max Wayne Scott, Otacon, E-Nate, Basement Radio Arcade Podcast, Jeffrey Giordano, we appreciate you. For anybody who happens to check out the archive version of this talking about games on the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. We appreciate you as well. Please feel free to like the channel. Wait, I always say that. To like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever I post new content. I will talk to you guys probably next Thursday, as I mentioned. Until next time, that's going to do it for me. I am out of here.